I feel like I have 1,000 questions for you, and I feel like you're going to have all the answers in your new book. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, and I don't know if I have 1,000 answers for you, but I'll be pretty excited if I get one right. So,
Okay, my first question: what should I do with my life? That's how your book starts off, and I just love it. It's good to see you. I know you've spent a long time interviewing a whole lot of people and learning, what makes people spark and what makes people tick and what they're all about, and you're helping so many people understand who they are as well. So, talk a little bit about your new book, Sparked.
yeah, so I've been on probably to be honest, a 2 decades long journey, trying to figure out like what is this thing we call work, and how can we make it feel different to us, because it's a thing we spend most of our waking hours doing for the better part of our entire adult lives. Most of us aren't going to retire, so we're going to work right up until we can't work anymore.
Right.
And for so many, the last generation or so, it's turned into an experience it pays the bills, hopefully. But very often it's also more gutting, more emptying than filling. And there's no real sense of purpose or meaning or joy or
Right.
energy or excitement. And I started to wonder if there was a different way to go about it. And I looked at a lot of literature. I looked at a lot of practical tools. And I started to wonder about something, whether there was an underlying impulse for work that's fairly universal across all of us. And it's different, but we can map them out. That would give us a feeling of joy and meaning and purpose and all those things we aspire to, but never quite can touch. So we started a research project and slowly identified these 10 impulses for work that make us come alive. And I realized once I figured those out, that wrapped around each one is a set of kind of quirky behaviors and tendencies and preferences that form archetypes. So we started calling them sparketypes, because it's a fun way to basically say the archetype of
Yeah,
work that
it's a
sparks
happy
you.
word.
Yeah, exactly. And then we built an assessment, because, this started as a hunch, and then we started sharing it with a lot of people and we're getting incredible feedback, but we wanted real validation and data. So we built and launched an assessment to help people actually basically just spend 10 to 15 minutes and really rapidly figure out what their sparketype is. And at the same time, we get the data on the back end of that. So since we launched at the end of 2018, as we're having this conversation, about 600,000 people have completed it. So we're sitting on
Wow.
about 30 million data points, and we've gotten tremendous, tremendous insight and data and validation. And what it's telling us is that people aren't feeling seen, and they're also not feeling expressed. And what we're seeing is that those are two separate but overlapping pains, because it's the pain of not feeling seen, and especially over the last year and a half when we feel isolated
Sure.
already. And then you pile on the fact that, okay, so now there's something that you know about yourself and it's not being expressed in a meaningful way in the work that you're doing. So now we've got the pain of being stifled. And when you layer those, we talk about this epidemic of burnout and malaise and frustration and anxiety about the future as if it's something new. It's not. This is just, it's been revealed in the last year and a half at a much higher and broad level, but this has been brewing for generations. So that's where a lot of the work has taken me.
Well, I just love it. I was looking and trying to figure out like what my sparketype is. I know what one of them is, but I think I have overlap, and I know a lot of people do. And you talk about that in the book. And then I also think this, because we have so many different ones, we could have two or three, I guess, right? Is that how we change? Like, we're one person in our life and we're passionate about some stuff, and then we go, at 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever, 2 o'clock in the afternoon to work. And then we're a different person. And then we come back and we're a different person when we get home. And I think that that's what leads to feeling not seen or confusion or not knowing what to do.
Yeah, that's such an interesting observation. And my sense of that is that if those two different modes, like the home mode and the work mode, are actually allowing us to step into maybe two different aspects of ourselves, but they're all real and true, then
Mm-hmm.
it's probably okay. But so
Okay.
often we wear a facade of expectation when we step into work mode.
Yep.
That is the thing that eventually destroys us, because the weight of that, we don't understand how heavy it is on our lives. But eventually it crushes us. It's like we're living
Yep.
under this heavy weight for our whole lives. So when we can shed that and realize, okay, so there's something deeper in me, and I can actually live that in all parts of life. I can show up that way in all parts of life. Things really start to change on a profound level.
Well, so you don't, you talk about life drains. And so it's not a life drain because that's what it can become. And people say like, oh, I'm burned out. Well, I don't think it's so much burned out. It's that they're becoming so many different spark types that they don't even know, they're moving into one thing and another, and they're becoming, you're right, like kind of a facade of who they are versus who they're really meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of conversation around burnout right now. And a lot of people are pointing to the fact that there's really no separation for a lot of people between that thing they call work and that thing they call life. I call the phenomenon work-life bleed. It's no longer blend. It's no longer balance. It's just bleed. But the thing is, like I was saying before, that's not the real problem. It's the tip of the iceberg. It's exacerbated things, but there's a deeper issue, which is that the way that we show up and invest ourselves 8, 10, 12, 15 hours a day, that thing called work, for most people is really profoundly misaligned with the essential nature of who they are, with that impulse for work that makes them alive.
So how do you figure out who you are, and then what do you do with it when you figure out who you are, and how do you kind of match make that to what you should be doing? I don't even want to call it work, but in all those hours of your week, because I think that's an important question that people, they really want that answered, and that's why they ask the question, what am I supposed to do with my life? Who am I?
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned, I start out my book Sparked with that line, like start to type, what should I do into Google?
Yeah.
And for many people, it will autocomplete the sentence with my life. It shows you how pervasive that questioning is. So two ways, to sort of like shortcut to get your way to understanding what your Sparketype is. One is you can actually take the Sparketype assessment. It's freely available. It's online. Anyone can literally like take it. And about 15 minutes later, you'll actually know 3 specific elements of your Sparketype. The longer form way to do it is to actually, in the book, literally you can read the entire book and go chapter by chapter where it identifies the 10 different types and really just kind of like feel into it. Like, does this feel like me? I would recommend taking the assessment first, because sometimes if you just look at all of the 10 different types first, you may have a tendency to be like, oh, this is cooler than this, or this is sexier than this. I kind of want myself to be this. And you'll kind of curve fit yourself to a specific type. So I'd recommend doing the assessment first and then reading the book after to get a much more nuanced understanding. And the last part of your question, which is like, then what do we do with that information? Like, how do we actually live that? I think the first thing to do is look at the work that you're currently doing and ask yourself, how well does this align, or how much does it misalign with this deeper impulse for work? Do I have a chance to bring my Sparketype to the work that I'm doing? What most people find is it's somewhere in the middle, that there's some of it allows this to come out, but some of it really doesn't. And then the question becomes, what do I do about that? There tends to be an impulse for a lot of people to just blow things up if they see that it's really not well aligned. Right. It's sort of like, and I get that. And I have actually been the person who's done that a couple of times during my life and endured the pain and the suffering that I was a little bit delusional that things would work out a lot faster and a lot better when I did that. And I invite people not to do that. That may be something that you end up doing, but it's not the first step in. The first step in to me is, if you find misalignment, then start to look at all the different ways that you might be able to actually do more of the work of your Sparketype. The thing is, once you actually know what this thing is, you can start to see all sorts of opportunities for most people. Engage in different tasks, different processes, use different tools, different projects, different opportunities without having to change your job or leave your company or like do something big and disruptive. We never understand these are available to us because we haven't known what to look for. But once you know your Sparketype for the first time, for most people in their lives, they actually understand what to look for. And once they start looking, they start seeing opportunities to do more of it all over the place that just weren't apparent because they weren't looking before. Very often that can get us so much closer to that feeling that we're looking for without having to make these big disruptive moves. And at the end of the day, you may optimize the job that you have for your Spark. You may spark it as much as you can. And it may be so much better that you're completely happy and you're fully alive and you want to stay there, but maybe still you're not entirely there. So then they start to look at, well, what can I do on the side? What are the activities, the roles, the hobbies, the devotions that I can wrap around this that would give me that feeling? And then the blend of that often is enough for you. And then if you get to that point and you're still not quite there, well, then maybe that's the time that you start to consider making some, more bigger disruptive change.
That's the blow up part, but you have some options before you get there, and I think that's important because the blow up part puts you back at zero, and then you've got to figure that all out. So, what is your sparketype?
So
I've got the list in front of me.
Yeah. So and it probably makes sense to just explain briefly. When you learn your sparketype profile, you learn three things: your primary sparketype, which think of it as like your strongest impulse for work that makes you come alive; your shadow sparketype, which is your runner-up, or very often it's the thing that you do in order to do the work of your primary at a higher level. And then what we call your anti-sparketype, which is the kind of work that empties you out the most. It takes the greatest amount of recovery, the greatest motivation. Yeah. So for me, my primary and shadow are, my primary is the maker. So that's all about making ideas manifest. It's the process of creation. I build things, and I have since I was probably 3 years old. Whether it's, like back then it was tree forts, it was bicycles. Now it's businesses, brands, books, companies, experiences, all sorts of things.
I mean, I watched you with Good Life Project way back. Yeah. Podcast wasn't a word when we did that. We did that interview with.
It was a long time ago.
Which was like 15, I think. And now all of a sudden, everyone's got a podcast, and you're like, oh yeah, I've got 10,000 interviews. So I always was so amazed by you. I was like, oh my gosh, he's got these microphones out. What's going on here? So okay.
Yeah, so that's my primary. My shadow is the scientist. The impulse for the scientist is all about figuring things out. So it's all about burning questions, puzzles, quandaries. And those two things work really well together. So I'm like out there building something. Maybe I'm working on building a company or a new brand, but I'm always going to hit a roadblock. There's always going to be something where I'm just get tripped off. And then I sort of switch into scientist mode, and it's all about problem solving and figuring things out. And as soon as I have what I need to step back into being just hyper generative and creation oriented, then I go back into that mode. So they work really well together.
That is great. I was trying to figure out my second because or my shadow. So, I think mine is the performer, the first one, I think, just based on my career, but I'm not entirely sure. And then I was trying to figure out my second, and I don't know if it's the maker or if it's the wannabe maker. I don't know which one it is. So I found it very interesting. I have a lot of highlights in the book, actually.
Yeah. So one of the most popular sparketypes is actually the performer. In fact, I think if I'm remembering the data properly, I think it's the most prevalent anti-sparketype. It's the one that most people struggle with the most.
Well, yeah, of course, because it's all based on what other people think, and I think it's just based on outer versus inner. Is that why?
I don't know what the answer to that is. But I think for some reason, there's something where people think about, and to sort of like be clear, it's not necessarily being in the performing arts. Like the performer's impulse is to animate, enliven, activate a moment, experience, or interaction.
Magic.
A lot of people just really struggle with that. And even if they get good at it, they're skilled at it, it's part of their job, and they actually do it and they do well at it. It's the type of thing where when they step out of that mode, they really have to recover. So it takes a lot of energy from them rather than giving energy to them.
I also wonder if just speaking out loud, if it's, because your slate is wiped clean after that performance or that moment or that magic or whatever it is, like it starts over again every time. It's not cumulative of itself. Like a scientist, I think, would be cumulative of a project. And I wonder if the performer is in the moment, wipe clean, start over again the next day.
Although, it's interesting. It's an interesting observation, and if you bring up the scientists actually experience something similar. So like if they're deep into a question, if it's something like a cancer researcher and it's going to take them a lifetime to figure something out, then they're always engaged. But a lot of scientists will pick these short, intense problems. They'll go deep into it and they figure it out. It's like the moment they figure it out is a moment of elation. And then the moment after it is what you're describing. You're like, okay, so now the slate's been wiped clean. Now what? Like their sense of purpose, they have to sort of like go and find the next thing to invest themselves in.
Yeah, I love it. I just find it so fascinating. I want to go back to the data points because I think it was 25 million. Is that right? Data points generated.
Yeah, closing in on 30 million now. Yeah.
30 million generated by over 500,000 people. I mean, those are really, that's serious research. Where did you find that? How did you find that this is what you wanted to do? Because when we first talked, you were doing really a lot of deep dive conversations with a lot of people, figuring out who they were, what made them tick, what made them spark, where they were going. And you were sharing that, but how did you get to the point where you realized that you needed to do more and more and more research, and it was necessary for you?
Good Life Project has been going for a decade now. As it started kind of as my personal exploration, I want to be able to sit down with just like really interesting people who are living interesting lives, and in some way, shape, or form, I thought they were embodied teachers, and learn from them. And we turned that into media, into a community, into something really beautiful. And then over the years, I started to realize, okay, so we're talking about the bigger question of what does it mean to live a good life? And within that question, there are a lot of, one of those big buckets is connection, relationships. One of the big buckets is well-being, optimization of like mental and physical well-being. But the other bucket is really about meaningful work. And I started to really think, well, this is the thing that we spend so much time doing. Let me try and understand what's happening here more, because so many people report it to be an experience that is not fulfilling in a really meaningful way. So a lot of it really originated it started more broadly with the exploration under Good Life Project of what does it mean to live a good life. And then I started to really just hone in increasingly on the domain of work, because it is so dominant in most people's lives. And because no matter what is out there already, we're still suffering a lot in that domain. And I just kept wondering, what are we missing?